we're just doing lots of new things today, and one is a panel over Zoom. So we have 4 panelists. I think that it'll just be better that everyone puts it to active speaker. And we are doing our Making the Most of Your Internship and Fellowship panel. And we have a group of 2 interns and 2 fellows to share tips and best practices from their experience and how, you know, what they did to kind of set their experience apart and make an impact for their supervisors, for their clients, and everything. So we have, I'm going to introduce all of them and then go to each one to kind of give them, to introduce yourself, talk about the type of work you're doing, and share about why you've chosen your career in either public interest law or committed to pro bono for the fellows. So we have Arturo Hernandez, who's the staff attorney at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. He's in the law project there, and he was a 2011 intern at Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. We have Ekaette Obot, who's a staff attorney at Lifespan, and she was a 2017 intern at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We have Brandon Knop, who's a corporate associate at Ferrazzano, and he was a 2017 PILI Fellow at LAF, now Legal Aid Chicago. And then Nidhi Narielwala, who is he's now an associate at K&L Gates. She was a 2018 PILI Fellow at ACLU. So, Arturo, please give us a little bit of a background about yourself, the type of work that you're doing now, just so that everyone kind of gets context for what you'll be talking about, and then share a little bit about why you chose the career path that you did.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Arturo Hernandez, and I'm a staff attorney with the Law Project of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, CCH. And I have been working as staff attorney at CCH since May of 2019. I previously worked at CCH as a PILI intern in 2011 when I was a law student. I'm sort of a generalist at CCH, but I would say a big emphasis of my work lately has been civil rights work. And I would say I enjoy being an advocate and making a difference in people's lives, which is why I chose this field.
Great. Ekaette, do you want to do the same?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ekaette Obot. I am a staff attorney at Lifespan Center for Legal Services. I've been working there since August of 2018. And I went to Chicago Kent College of Law, graduated from there in 2018. So Lifespan offers services in counseling, legal services for immigration, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And I'm working in family law with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as getting orders of protection. And I did a little bit of domestic violence work while as an intern in law school, although I did do more civil rights work when I did my PILI internship in 2017. But I've generally always wanted to do something within the public interest realm, so still doing it.
Great. And then Brandon?
Yes, hi, I'm Brandon. I'm currently an associate at Ferrazzano. I started my career after law school at Kirkland & Ellis and then moved here about a year ago, April 2019. As Brent mentioned, I was a PILI Fellow in 2017 at LAF, which is now Legal Aid Chicago. And I served there in their housing field, mostly working to keep people from being evicted from their units or from being charged too much by the housing authority. And now, while I do practice corporate law now, I was an accountant prior to law school, so kind of stuck with the business nature of what my experience was. But I still enjoy doing a lot of pro bono work. I've done some trans name change cases, which I've really enjoyed, as well as some corporate work for nonprofits, doing contracts, leases, insurance work, things like that.
Great. And Nidhi?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nidhi, and I did my PILI fellowship after law school at the ACLU. I went to law school at WashU in St. Louis, and that's essentially where I started, getting into pro bono and public service. And so I spent a semester at the ACLU in San Francisco, my last year of law school, which really drove me to applying to the fellowship. And my fellowship itself was a great opportunity. I worked on a lot of women's reproductive rights cases and criminal justice reform, which were the two projects of the ACLU that I primarily worked at, and then had the chance to do some research here and there in some of the other projects. And I started my career after the fellowship. I started my career at Baker McKenzie, and I only recently lateraled over to K&L Gates. It's been about 2 months, so an interesting time. But yeah, right now I do a lot of pro bono work as part of my practice. I do primarily data privacy, data security, and technology transactions, and have been working a lot with the nonprofits in the healthcare space with their HIPAA compliance work, given that it's a very complicated, area of law, and there are a lot of great organizations out there that are doing great things in their community. So yeah.
Great. So let's start with where we all kind of are now with starting at the internships or fellowships. So if you guys can think back about when you were starting as an intern or fellow, and talk a little bit about how you were able to start off on the right foot. How did you pick up on the culture of the agency, and what you did that you really think was really effective, or wish that you would have done that someone else did, that you can share with our interns and fellows, and particularly with us all being remotely or working remotely, how do you think that what things can we do that we can show that we're can try to stand out even though we're on Zoom. So Arturo, let's start back with you.
Sure. I would say it's really important to be engaged in the work. I think volunteering to conduct research, helping with intake of clients. I think this is important work, and I think that if you take the initiative, I think your supervisor and other attorneys will appreciate it. I think they will recognize the work you do and be grateful for it.
Ekaette?
One thing that I did was within the first week or so, I reached out to the executive director of the agency to have lunch with her. And I think just in general, trying to make those individual connections with the attorneys that are working at your agency is really invaluable. And even just making sure to go through and look at, their LinkedIn to see what they've done previous to working at that place, and then, having conversations with them about those things definitely is a big help.
Great. And that's still something we can do over Zoom. We can both eat lunch and talk to each other over Zoom or coffee or, Zoom happy hours. So
Definitely.
Great. Brandon?
Yeah, I would echo similar things about trying to talk to as many people as you can. I've been surprised at our firm, the partners who I didn't think were particularly interested in technology, absolutely adore Teams and Zoom, and they are all excited about video conferencing with us as associates. So you'll quickly be able to pick up on what your entity is, where they are in that aspect, but definitely take advantage of it if you can. But also, I think it's really important to figure out what the expectations are for you. Different interns or different fellows have wildly different experiences for the summer. And I think it'll be maybe even different or more different this summer because of the challenges that we face. So definitely put yourself out there, ask what you can participate in, and try to take advantage of as many opportunities to sit in on meetings and whatnot as you can, or as technology allows. But just make sure that you understand what it is that your supervisors are looking out of you for the summer, and make sure that you can deliver on that.
Great. Nidhi?
Yeah, I want to second what everyone else said. And just to add to that, I think during your summer, it's going to be much harder than if you were in the office to, follow up and ask for feedback and kind of get the full experience. And so I want to, stress that to the extent possible, definitely be as available and willing to reach out, once you get a project to follow up, and then once it's completed, to get that feedback, because that's the most valuable part of like this experience, in addition to the people, the networking and the communications with other people that you'll make. Definitely the feedback that you'll get on your work is important.
Great. And I should say to everyone that please use the chat to put in your own questions for me to ask. I have my list, and about halfway through, around 3 o'clock, I'm gonna just go to the chat and stop my questions and ask the questions that you want to know. So if they aren't there, I'll go back to my questions, but I want to make sure that you all have time to get in the questions that you're really curious about, that you're thinking about as you're starting your internships or fellowships this summer. So kind of teeing back to what Nidhi was saying about feedback, what do you think are the most important expectations that supervisors have? What maybe did you realize towards the end of the summer that you wish you knew more in the beginning? And if you do want to get feedback, that's one of the most, the most things that we hear from interns and fellows at the end is that they wish that they got more feedback. What's the best way to approach your supervisor to either request that, to get that on everything, or even to sometimes like see feedback in not getting feedback, if that makes sense. So Arturo, can I pass it back to you, and we'll go down like we've been.
Sure. Well, I would say in regards to feedback, I think it's important to make clear that you're genuine about receiving it and be open to it. I think if you want to develop professionally, I think you have to be open to feedback. So I think that's something that I would say about that.
Great. Ekaette? Did you lose her? Oh.
Sorry, I was
Oh,
with mute. So when I had my PILI internship, we actually set up specific times that were devoted for feedback. And that was just something that was instituted by our supervisor. And it could kind of shift depending on what projects you were working on and who exactly you were working with. But that was something that was already kind of set up in the structure of the organization. And so if that is not something that is already kind of in place, then I think it would be perfectly acceptable for you as the intern to say, is it okay if we have a quick check-in maybe every week or every 2 weeks, just to kind of touch base and make sure that I'm, producing what I'm supposed to produce. I don't think any supervisor would have a, negative reaction to that.
for sure. I don't think so either. Brandon?
Yeah, I would agree that a specific time for feedback is probably the most effective way to go about getting it, because you're both focused on that in that moment. And something you can do to aid your supervisors too, not all the time is a supervisor working with less experienced attorneys. So if you have specific questions, or if you want feedback on a specific provision or a specific memo that you worked on, or even a specific part of it, I think that can help guide the attorneys to thinking about ways that you can improve your work, and can give you more feedback that you can actually use right away in the rest of your internship, and then as you go forward once you start your legal career as well.
Great. Nidhi, any other?
I want to second what Brandon said. I think it's important, especially because people are busy right now, that it may be tough for your work providers to give you feedback that's going to be most helpful for you. So if you're able to kind of do the grunt work and make a list of questions and review the final product and be like, there were 3 different sections that I didn't quite understand, you're kind of guiding them through that feedback process, which is then helpful to them and you.
So a lot of us are going to be, a lot of the interns and fellows are going to be working on very sensitive and personal issues with clients, now mostly over Zoom and phone, but with people who are from different cultures or socioeconomic classes, what do you think is the best way to get comfortable with clients, and kind of develop that attorney-client relationship? Arturo, can I pass it back to you?
Sure. I think when working with different cultures and socioeconomic classes, I think active listening and empathy are important. It's a little bit different now since we're on Zoom, but also I think like the power dynamics, you have to be mindful of that. So like when you conduct an intake, kind of like the setting up of the room, the office space, I think that's important. Yeah.
Great. Ekaette?
I think it's really important to, when you are first having a conversation with a new client or any client, kind of setting up the direction of how the conversation is going to go. And especially if you're talking about sensitive, kind of giving them a little warning almost as to, maybe how deep you're going to go into certain topics. And even things such as timing. I know for certain intakes, you may only have 30 minutes or you may only have 45 minutes to do that intake. It's important to let the client know that so that you're not cutting them off at a certain point or, kind of trying to speed them along. I think all of that, just having a preface for everything at the beginning will kind of ease your client's nerves going through that process.
Great. Brandon?
I think those are both excellent points. I'd also add to that a lot of times when you're doing pro bono work, there may be limitations to what you can provide your clients in terms of help, and they may not understand what those limitations are, or they may have different expectations versus what you can provide. So I think it's important to level set, what you're providing as a pro bono attorney and what your organization can provide, and make sure that you don't overpromise, because it's much better to have the person come in with a full understanding of what you can do to help, as opposed to getting their hopes up and then being let down by you or by the organization. And for those first conversations, I think that's a great thing to ask your supervisors about, or somebody at close to your level, if there's a more junior attorney, to see how they handled those first few conversations to make sure that they were doing that.
Nidhi?
I agree with what everyone else said, but just to add that, making your clients feel comfortable with talking to you, especially because you're not there in person, and ensuring that, you may not have all the answers. So kind of like Brandon said, it's okay to take a step back and say, let me go check with, my supervisor and I'll get back to you, rather than saying either no or yes or anything, definitive.
So I'm going to take a question from the chat that's more specifically about the fellowship program. So Nidhi, I'll start back with you and then go to Brandon. They've read about the fellowship program and wanted to know what is they're an intern, but I think this probably is really good for fellows to hear. What was your experience balancing both working and studying during your fellowship? And then what was it like, because it's only 300 hours compared to other fellowships that are year-round? And then Madison also asked if there was any differences that you felt as a fellow with other interns, if there was how that was. Are there pros or cons to each? So I know that was a lot, but it was all kind of themed around the fellowship program.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with your first question about studying and balancing studying with the fellowship. I mean, a lot of the organizations, I would say all the organizations are very understanding of the fact that you have to study. And so I personally was able to make my own schedule, and I study better in the morning. And so I came in after studying in the morning and worked in the afternoons, and that worked best for me. And if anything, working remotely may benefit you in that you can take advantage of being able to work at whatever time works for you. So it's also important to be clear about your schedule and stick to it, because there are other people that are depending on you to stick to it. So, you know, if you say you're going to be available a certain day, then it's important to make sure that, you know, you get your studying done, or you get everything else they need to get done beforehand, so that you're able to, you know, make sure that the schedule that you gave your organization is what you're sticking through to. And then the other questions were.
Were other interns, were there PILIs with you, PILI interns, and then was there kind of differences that were felt, or you kind of were all kind of a cohort?
Well, there were times that we overlapped, and so because we had all made our own schedules, we weren't always there at the same times. But what was helpful is that, you know, once we got to know each other, we kind of met up on our own whenever we were both free, even if that wasn't at work, just to like have that kind of camaraderie about the experiences we're having, and, you know, any tips or advice that we got from our time so far. It's always very helpful to kind of touch base with someone who's like your peer and make sure that, you know, you're on the right path, or having someone to talk to about if anything comes up.
Brandon, how did you kind of study and divide your summer and everything? Let's start there.
Yeah, at my fellowship with LAF, it was one where I was definitely working pretty much, you know, every minute of the time that I was there. I know that other fellows had a little bit more time in between projects or whatnot to study, so I had to make sure that I set time aside to study. But I thought that the structure of having a schedule, because of the fellowship, actually really helped, because I had set hours every day that I would go to LAF, and then after lunch or whatnot, I would come home and study for 4 or 5 hours or whatnot. The one thing I would definitely recommend is take off at least a week, if not 2 weeks, prior to the exam, to just be able to focus on studying. You're going to be stressed. You're going to want to cram a little bit. And most organizations are going to be flexible with that. They understand that, you know, you need that time. And then, as far as I remember, I think I came back after the exam to do like some full-time work afterwards. So a lot of times they'll allow you to do that, and then you don't have to worry about studying at all. So you can kind of make up some of the hours you might have taken off the weeks prior.
And then at Legal Aid Chicago, you must have had other interns that were also working with you. How do you think your experience compared to theirs? Pros or cons with that?
Yeah, we did. I think LAF treated, or Legal Aid Chicago now, treated us pretty much the same. We were all in the same meetings. We had the same formal mentorship and whatnot. I think the bigger difference was, I think the fellows got a little bit more chance to kind of go off on their own in terms of doing some of the bigger like litigation projects and whatnot. So I found myself in court quite often, and sometimes by myself as a fellow. And there was maybe a little bit more hand-holding for the interns. But other than that, the interns and the fellows were both doing really substantive work, and almost the same kind of throughout the summer.
Great. So Arturo, let me start back with you and ask, what qualities, I mean, now as a supervisor, do you look at from interns and fellows that you see help interns and fellows stand out, or even looking back to things that you did that you think made you stand out from the crowd? And then what other issues do you see young attorneys, interns, fellows having that you think are just, you know, common things that you're seeing people struggle with, or kind of issues that you're spotting in younger attorneys?
I think most supervisors know there will be a learning curve when you first start an internship, so I don't think they expect you to know everything, but I think they want you to learn about the work the organization does, and eventually get a better grasp as the internship goes on. So I think it's helpful to ask questions, especially when you're not clear. I think that making it clear that you are interested and passionate in the work, you just don't understand. But I think seeing the progression throughout the internship is extremely important. And I'll go back to like being mindful that you are learning, right? For some people, this might be like their first legal position. So I think supervisors understand that, and I think just making clear that you don't understand, but you're interested and you want to get to that point. I think definitely seeing some progress at the end of the internship will kind of get you maybe a position in the future.
Ekaette, what makes an intern or fellows be a star?
I think definitely during my internship, it was important to have interns that were comfortable sharing their opinions and sharing their perspectives. I think oftentimes it can be intimidating, you know, if you're in that, you know, big group meeting or, you know, full staff meeting, you think, oh, well, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole here. I don't really have anything to offer, which is just not true at all. As an intern, you have a very fresh perspective that's very valuable. So just keeping that in mind and being able to offer your perspective on things.
Great. Brandon?
I think far and away the most important thing is timeliness and communication, making sure you're hitting deadlines, you're communicating if you're going to be late on something. And those are kind of just like the basics that everybody looks for. The thing that I think you can do to really stand out is to show initiative. And one of the easiest ways to do that is when you have questions, which obviously they will come up, try to think through what you think some of the answers might be or some of the solutions might be. And if you can come to a supervisor and say, hey, I have this question, I'm not really sure of the answer, but here are a couple of points that I think might influence the answer, or here's a couple of different options that I could do. What do you think would be the best solution? And that's also something that you can do if you ever make a mistake is, you know, here's what happened, here's what I did, but here's what I think we can do to solve it. Things like that, you know, show your supervisors that you're thinking about these things critically, but still is letting them you know, provide their expertise and help you to the right answer, which I think is great.
Nidhi?
Yeah, I want to second what everyone else said. As much as like you can only control so much, and you only know so much this early on, and so being open to learning and being on time and communicative about deadlines and making sure you're meeting them is a good way to make sure that you are you're on the right path.
Great. So Brandon started to talk about this, which is my next question, which is how to handle mistakes. So let me start back with Arturo and tell us, you're an intern, you're a fellow, you just realized that you made a mistake, you filed something that you shouldn't have, that, something was, you sent something off that you shouldn't have. What's the best way to handle a mistake that was made?
Sure. So I think it's helpful once you realize you made a mistake to not only communicate the mistake, but to also identify a solution or approach of addressing it when you bring it to the attention of your supervisor, sort of bad news but good news as well. Because many times you can correct it. So I think having that initiative saying, I made this mistake, however, here's what you do. You could amend the notice, for example. And I did some research, turns out we have X amount of days to do so, we can still fix it. So I think not just pointing out some mistake or delivering bad news, but also offering a solution to go with it.
Great. Ekaette?
Just for your own sanity, I think just realizing that everyone makes mistakes, and it's the mistake you made or may make is honestly probably not the end of the world, and someone has made that mistake before. And just, yeah, I echo what Arturo said, just being able to be upfront about it and just have it addressed as quickly as you're able to. But yeah, just keeping your head on straight and just knowing that it's probably okay.
Brandon, I loved what you said with, even when you ask a mistake, you have a mistake, that you offer solutions. Should I do this or should I do that? Any other words of wisdom?
No, I think that covers most of it. The only other specific thing I would recommend is if the courts do open back up, my biggest mistake as a fellow was I forgot my 7-Eleven license card when I went to court. And one of the judges asked me for it, which is pretty atypical. And he was very displeased that I did not have it. So he made me get up on the stand and swear in and swear that I was officially a 7-Eleven and that I had gone through the proper schooling and whatnot. So make sure you have that card if you go to court.
Nidhi?
Yeah, I want to echo what everyone else said, and I'm sure this goes without saying, but making sure you learn from your mistakes and not like make the same ones over and over is obviously important.
Great. So I'll start with the fellows for this. So Nidhi, I'll stay with you. How did you use your time at your agency, the skills that you're gaining, going to court and doing all that? How did that translate when you went back to the firm? And are there things that fellows can be doing so that they can leverage those skills, keep track of what they're doing? Just in general, how were you able to kind of leverage that when you got back to the firm?
Yeah, so when I started practicing, I knew I wanted to make, pro bono a big part of my practice. And so I made an effort to reach out to organizations and continue to stay connected, because my practice at the firm level is very transactional, but I still wanted to be able to get the client interaction and to help out in cases that may not, and most times did not overlap with my like specialized privacy and technology practice. And so I thought that was a good way to kind of round out my skills as I continue progressing at my firm. So yeah.
Brandon, were there things that you kind of were able to say, oh, I could do this because I did it during my PILI, or other ways that you were able to leverage your skills?
I think it's the soft skills that are the ones that transfer most quickly and are the toughest to pick up in law school or other settings. You get a ton of client contact with a lot of these fellowships, and it's something that you don't really get unless you're doing like a clinic or whatnot in law school. And that's something that you're going to have to do right away in law school, right away out of law school when you start your job. So, I think that experience is invaluable to be able to think about what does it take to prepare for a client meeting? What does it take to be able to walk through and communicate effectively your points? And then in terms of giving back or connecting with your fellowship, it doesn't have to end when your fellowship is over as well. I'm still really active with Legal Aid Chicago. I'm on their Young Alumni Board. I don't specifically do housing work with them anymore, but I help out with planning fundraisers, and we're still active with PILI here, serving on the panel. So there's other ways to get involved, even if it looks different from what your fellowship did during the summer.
Great. So let me just remind everyone, there's 100 people here. There must be more questions that you have. So please put your questions into the chat so that you don't leave and say, I wish that they had talked about this. I wish that they had talked about that. So for the intern alumni, Ekaette, can you talk a little bit about how you got your current position? Were there things that you did in your PILI, that connections that you made, or experiences that you can do to kind of, if you're an intern and you're on the path that you want to do public interest law, what can you do to kind of make sure that you solidify that path?
So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I really would emphasize that networking and making connections at your internship is very important. Just the public interest community is pretty small, and small in the sense of a lot of people just know a lot of people that work at different agencies. And so if you're able to make a good impression and foster a good relationship with, your supervisor at your internship, or just even different people that are working there, they may know someone who works at a different agency that you may be interested in working at. And so I think for me, where I'm working now at Lifespan, they had a lot of connections with people that that I work with at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, as well as other internships that I had throughout law school. And so I have to think that had a small hand in me being able to land a job at, right after graduation, which sometimes is difficult for public interest jobs. So just being really adamant about making those connections.
Great. Arturo, you are back at the PILI agency. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of networked your way and able to make connections that brought you back.
Sure. I would say it's important to continue being involved, very similar to Brandon. I was involved in CCH's associate board for a bit after I was a PILI intern. So I continued to stay engaged with the organization, staff there. I think if you had a good experience with the organization and would like to one day work there as an attorney, then I would definitely recommend that.
Great. So Arturo, I'll stay with you and then go down the panel for this question. We've talked a little bit about this. We had a session on vicarious trauma this morning, but especially for you and Ekaette, but I think everyone kind of is experiencing this now. How are you practicing self-care? And do you have any tips for interns or fellows who, during this time where everyone should be, I mean, even during regular times, people have stressed that they need to have tips for self-care, but especially now, what are things that you're doing to make sure after you have stressful times with your clients that we can learn from?
I would say setting your schedule, right? Once I'm out of work, I'm out of work, even though right now we're working remotely. I think just having kind of those boundaries, work hard during your schedule, but then you need to find kind of whether you're a jogger, runner. I have some weights at home, so I kind of just do home workout. And then I just kind of do some leisurely activities. I think just having that, I know it's probably a lot more difficult now since we're, the home and the office are kind of one, but I think just still trying to find a way to just separate the two.
Great. Ekaette? Unmute still.
I also want to echo that setting boundaries in terms of time is super, super important. But I also think that even within your work time, even giving yourself 2 to 3 minutes to just, I call it meditation, some people may call it something else, but to just take a breath and be able to just clear your mind for a moment. If you've just had a particularly heartbreaking client meeting, or even before you're about to have the client meeting, sometimes to just be able to just have 2 minutes where you just clear your mind can really make a lot of difference, instead of just going from thing to thing and not giving yourself a chance to really breathe and accept the fact that what you were doing and dealing with was actually something very difficult, and you may need time to just debrief and come down from that.
Mm-hmm. Brandon?
I think the last couple of months have been a great opportunity for people to kind of let their guard down a little bit. We're in a situation where everybody has at least one thing in common, which is that we're all dealing with the pandemic in some way. And for some of us, that means having to watch our kids while we're working or studying, or dealing with things that you don't have to deal with when you're in the workplace. And I think that that's led to more meaningful conversations and relationships with my clients and with the other partners and associates at my firm. When you see somebody in their favorite hoodie or whatever, as opposed to the partner dressed up in a suit, it just lets your guard down a little bit. It lets you get to know them as to who they are as a person, as opposed to the suit at the office. And I think that it's likely that over the course of the summer, for those of you who are interning, that you'll probably be able to do the same thing with your clients. You all have at least one thing in common, and that you all went through this in the city here or wherever you are. And that'll give you a great jumping off point to be able to connect with them on something.
Wonderful. Nidhi?
Yeah, I agree. It's a tough time, but if you carve out some time to, I would say, like, commiserate with, you know, your fellow interns and fellows, it's really easy to get kind of bogged down in your own life and kind of think that you're the only person going through all of this, but it's also really helpful to stop and talk to people around you, if not physically, virtually, about, you know, your experiences at work, and who better understands that than your fellow colleagues. So really taking that time to touch base and make sure you're checking in on each other.
Great. So Diane in the chat asks, how do you approach asking to stay on cases after your internship or fellowship? So did anyone this is mostly for fellows, but I think interns could just ask that too. But did any of you stay on a case, and how did that conversation go? No one?
No, I feel like certain organizations may have, you know, internal policies of, if you're no longer, you know, working as part of the organization, then the cases should kind of stay with the organization. But I've definitely helped out in future cases with people I worked with at my fellowship.
Yeah, I definitely think just from hearing from others, interns and fellows, that think just going to your supervisor and saying, I really want to stay on this case, even just as a general volunteer, and help out after. I know of, you know, even when I've heard, like, even when interns or fellows don't stay on a case, but supervisors will email to let the intern or fellow know, like, this case that you work on, we just got this decision back in court, which is also exciting. But I think that, you know, if you are interested in staying involved, I'm sure the supervisor would be happy to have you, whether it's for an official internship or just as a couple hours of volunteer work. And especially for fellows, I've heard a lot about firms wanting you to kind of take your cases back to the firm as a pro bono case when you start. So if there are any cases where you think that this might be something longer term, that's probably something to flag and then talk to your supervisor about. And then another question, and maybe I'll go to Ekaette first and then Arturo for this. It's more related to the public interest field. So an intern knows that she wants to pursue a career in public interest law, but not sure exactly which focus area she most wants to look into. So how can she learn about other focus areas outside of the ones for the summer without burning any bridges? So Ekaette, I feel like you kind of dabbled in different things before landing in Lifespan, so maybe take that first.
Sure. Yeah, so I did work in some family law areas and domestic violence, as well as civil rights. In terms of not burning any bridges, I don't think there's any negativity to kind of hopping around different practice areas, because that just makes you a more well-rounded candidate, especially when you're looking for jobs. You can kind of look in different areas and say, hey, I have practice in, you know, A, B, and C, or experience in A, B, and C. In terms of how to figure out what you're interested in, I mean, I think the easiest thing to do is just to go for it. And just, it's kind of hard to tell exactly if you're going to be interested in something until you are actually hands-on doing it. So if there's a certain area that you think you may be interested in, apply for an internship in that, and then, you know, see what happens there. And then the next summer, maybe you do something completely different so that you're able to compare and contrast and see what path you'd rather go in.
Arturo, do you have any thoughts on tips for this intern?
Well, I think law school is a great time to figure out what kind of law you want to do. And I think it also works out given the time frame. Like you can just do a summer, you could do a fall semester, clinical internship. So I think that's probably the best time to do different things. And also, it's expected. I don't think that any employer will see that as kind of a negative thing. You do multiple internships, clinical work, and then once you realize what you do want to do, I think that even makes you look like a stronger candidate. I tried many things, and I think this is the area I want to pursue.
Yeah, and just to add my own 2 cents, when I was a PILI intern, I heard Barry Taylor from Equip for Equality. He came and presented to at one of our PILI sessions, and I, you know, went up to him afterwards and said, "How do I intern at Equip for Equality? What the work that you're doing sounds, you know, really interesting." And so that's how I got my next internship. So it was, even though I was doing work at AIDS Legal Counsel and kind of shifted to something else, I don't think that anyone in the public interest community is going to see that as burning a bridge or you know, there's no like sides of public interest law. I think we're all just wanting more attorneys to get involved in doing this work in whatever way. So great thoughts. Another question that's more about building trust with clients. So Arturo, let's start with you, especially working with you know, clients at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. What tips do you have to build trust and rapport with clients that might have very different backgrounds from your own? And we talked a little bit in the previous session about active listening, but what do you find useful to build that trust and rapport with clients?
I think honesty, I think managing expectations. I think it was mentioned before that you don't want to promise something that you can't deliver. So I just think being very clear with the client as to what you can and cannot do, what you will be able to do, and what services you can provide.
Okay. Ekaette, what are your thoughts working with, you know, victims and survivors of domestic violence?
I'd say one thing that's important is to not make any assumptions. I know dealing with certain populations, they may present a specific issue to you that may often be linked with another issue. So if they're going through a housing, they have some concerns with their housing, they may not automatically have issues in other areas. So making sure that you're actually listening to the issues that they are specifically presenting to you and sharing with you that are important to them. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Anything over Zoom? Anything with like, what are you working with clients over Zoom? Anything that you can share from the past couple weeks in your experience?
I actually have not been working with clients over Zoom. It's all just been the same with phone calls and emails. But also just acknowledging that they too are, you know, going through a lot of different changes with everything during the pandemic, and trying to reassess if their needs have changed during this time. So just always being able to listen out for those things.
So I love this question that Natasha asked. Let's start with Arturo and then go down the line again. What was your favorite moment or part of your internship or fellowship that you can share?
I think looking at myself from the beginning of my internship to the end of the internship, I mean, for me, I would say even now, like how much I've learned about the organization and the work they do. I think when I first started compared to even when my PILI internship ended, I learned a lot. So I think that goes with in case like there's going to be a learning curve. I think especially if you go into an area that you didn't know a lot about, but you're interested in learning more, I think realizing that you're probably going to learn it and you're going to be surprised of how much you learn and how much information you're going to be able to retain. So I think progressing as a professional, that was one of the biggest moments.
Great. Ekaette?
So working at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights was the first time that I got to work directly with Black female attorneys, which was a huge deal for me. And they very specifically, you know, reached out to me and talked with me about issues that they had faced and things that they did specifically to, you know, propel them in their careers. And I know that's not an experience that maybe everyone would get to have or have, you know, a similar experience in that way. But I was very lucky to have that experience at my PILI fellowship or internship.
Brandon?
I was lucky enough, most of the housing cases that came through LAF are pretty quick. You just go into court and you just ask for a stay of the eviction or a delay. But we had a particularly good case come in that was an arbitration against the Chicago Housing Authority. So I was able to work on the case from the beginning of my fellowship until pretty much the end, preparing for and arguing the arbitration, which was set up just like a regular trial. So I got to write my own and perform or present my own opening and closing, direct and cross-examination of witnesses, and oral arguments in front of the arbitrator. And we ended up winning the arbitration as well and got the individual their housing back. So it was a really rewarding experience and something that I would have never been able to do, especially as a corporate attorney. So it will be one of the things that I remember the most in my legal career, not just in my PILI fellowship.
Nidhi?
I think the most memorable moment of my fellowship was the day that it was this day that Justice Kennedy had announced his retirement, and in that same week, the third travel ban was upheld by the Supreme Court, and California's FACT Act, which was the law that talked about like having visible notices about other like options when it came to abortion clinics, was struck down. It was just a very like trifecta of like hopelessness. And the one good thing that came out of it was that being at the ACLU at that time, like that feeling of like everyone around you is feeling that same level of like frustration and anger and hopelessness, but that you're in it together and like, you are working together to do as much as you can to fight back and having that sense of community.
Great. So if anyone has any other questions, we still probably have time for one or two in the chat, but I'll ask this one. What is the best way for a student to end their internship or fellowship? And how did you or would you recommend that a student maintain contact with their agency? I know it was touched on a little bit, but Arturo, let's go back to you and then kind of go down the line.
Sure. It may sound simple, but I think expressing interest in the organization, I think making it clear either you want to return for the fall or how much you enjoyed the work or the experience, and then continue to be involved. Like for me, it was the associate board.
I would say, and this probably seems very obvious and basic, but I did see a couple of people run into some issues at the end of their internship in terms of finishing their projects. So I would say 2 weeks or so before your time there is scheduled to be over, check in with your supervisor if there needs to be some kind of adjustment in terms of what you think you'll be actually able to get done in that time period. It's okay if it's going to end up being a little bit different than what you started out with, but it needs to be communicated to your supervisor. So just check in on that.
Great. Brandon?
Those are both great points. I know my PILI supervisor was also invaluable in providing me a reference when I made the move from my first law firm to Ferrazzano. Obviously, your contacts for any summer internship you have, but also for your PILI fellowship or internship are great to be able to use that person, you know, whether it be that job or down the line as a reference, or also for networking to be able to find other opportunities to either give back or for work opportunities.
Nidhi?
Yeah, I still stay in contact with my PILI supervisor. You know, before all this happened, we grab lunch or coffee regularly just to check in. And I actually ended up joining the ACLU's Next Generation Board, which is a way to stay connected. A lot of organizations have young professional boards, and so that's one way to, you know, stay connected to the organization and help as much as you can in achieving the organization's mission.
Great. So last question. Now looking back, what do you think that you really learned or got from your PILI experience that you have used or that you've applied in your own practice or as an attorney? Arturo, let's start with you to close everything out.
I would say, I think that's where I got my practical hands-on work experience, how to interact with clients. That's where I learned a lot of my lawyering skills in my internship. So I think that's where I got the real hands-on direct work experience.
Great. Ekaette?
I think one of the best things that I got from my internship was just learning how to adapt to different situations. Because I think a lot of the times in law school, you know, you're given an assignment and that's your assignment and that's what you do. And when it's a real life situation, you know, things may change in the client's, some factor in the client's life may change and you have to adapt to that situation. And having the support of, you know, the staff at your organization to figure out how to move in those situations was something that I am still using when I work with my clients now in my practice.
Great. Brandon?
I think it's a good opportunity to build some confidence in your skills as a lawyer. Coming into especially a big firm, it's really easy in your first year or two to think about, you know, how little you know and how far you have to grow to be able to like reach the levels of, you know, what the partners are producing in terms of work product. But it's a good reminder to be able to look back and say, hey, during my internship, during my fellowship, I was able to truly help out, you know, people and make an impact on their lives. And I have skills that I built during my time in law school to be able to be a good attorney. And that's a good reminder, I think, especially when things get rough as you start your career.
Nidhi, final word.
Yeah. I echoed what everyone else said, but also I think it's important, at least what I learned is a sense of humility. I think in law school, it's very easy there's like a sense of like you have to know everything or at least pretend like you know everything, which is stressful. But from my PILI fellowship, I was able to kind of open up and say, you know, there's a lot that I don't know, but, you know, I'm willing to learn and put in the work. And that was very helpful still to this day, you know, working as a junior associate at a law firm, there's a lot that I don't know how to do. And so having the sense of like asking for help when you need it is really, really key.
Great. Well, first, I want to thank all of our panelists. So a muted round of applause to all four of you. Thank you very much for your words of wisdom. And then thank you everyone for joining us for our 2020 virtual orientation. I hope that this helped set you up for a wonderful summer where you will gain skills and insight and connections, whether you pursue a career in public interest law or include pro bono in your work. So PILI will be here each week with our sessions, and you'll be getting tons of emails from us with more information about those sessions. So thank you. The link for the evaluation was included in the chat. It's buried in all your thank yous, which I appreciate. I'll include that link again. So if any of you who joined can click that and provide us with an evaluation, we'd appreciate it. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us, and appreciate all the thank yous in the chat. So thanks, everyone.